You're listening to The Mountain Spirit, a podcast of Christian Appalachian Project, where we explore the stories, voices, and change makers shaping Appalachia. Our guest today is Willa Johnson, Disaster Recovery Communications Coordinator at Invest Appalachia. Willa is a communications professional and community organizer who shares stories of recovery and hope across the Appalachian region. Her goal is to build local and national narratives and help build trust between impacted communities and recovery partners. We are so excited to have you on the show today. Willa, welcome to the Mountain Spirit Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I wonder if you could just start out by just describing for our audience what it was like for you growing up in Letcher County, Kentucky, and what that journey was like from growing up there to the work you're doing now in disaster recovery communications.
Yeah. So I grew up in the county I'm in now, and I grew up in a smaller town called McRoberts. And my mom was a school teacher. My dad was a coal truck driver. Both are retired and disabled now. I grew up in front of a strip mine site where there was a lot of mining that happened actively. And so I knew what it was like to have the siren blow and your house kind of shake. When I was in sixth grade, we had a silt pond break on the mountain where the coal company is. And so that was my first ever disaster and having to evacuate in a flash flood, and saw my neighbors lose their home. And many people lost a lot of other belongings. And through that, there was a dispute over what had happened. And my dad, who was a coal truck driver and, worked for the coal companies, saw that people weren't getting what they needed to recover and that the narrative was sort of being a little fickle. And so he got, this was in the 90s. So he got one of those heavier cameras and hiked to the top of the mountain in the middle of the night and shot the coal dam as it had collapsed and drove it to the local TV station and handed it over.
Oh, wow.
And so that was really, I was in sixth grade and my dad is not a media person, but that was a lesson for me in that the camera really wields a lot of power in that it's hard to refute what you see with your eyes.
Yeah.
And so from there, I think maybe that really always led me to a place of if I see my community hurting, I want to step up and help.
Yeah.
And so through the years, before I even knew what mutual aid was, in Appalachia, if there was tornadoes in Cleveland, Tennessee, or West Liberty, or fires in Gatlinburg, I was always organizing community drop-offs and taking supplies to communities. And so I started to learn a lot about natural disasters. This was in my free time, really. But I started to learn a lot about natural disasters and what people really need on the ground. In that time, I had worked at places like Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, Apple Shop, Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, all as an organizer, media trainer, and I did a lot of work with youth. I was always talking about Appalachia in general. What did Appalachia need in general? How do we break these stereotypes? But all the while in my free time, I was working on natural disasters. And then in 2022, I was living in McRoberts again, and I was living on the main highway, and I was there with my 5-year-old who was due to start kindergarten in the next week, and the 2022 flood happened. And so in the course of a night, we lost the home we were in. We lost our church. We lost the school he was set to start kindergarten in. And I lost my office where I worked at, which was a 50-year-old organization with tons of history. And those were all 4 in different towns and different communities. And so being on the receiving end of needing help and really feeling what it's like to be in crisis, I thought I knew disaster recovery because I had worked in it until I experienced it. And so after that, it really became this moment of I couldn't turn back. The natural disasters are working faster. They're coming quicker. They're coming closer together. They're more regional. And so I knew I wanted to do more work around natural disaster recovery in Appalachia. And then Hurricane Helene hit. And so it's sort of been this leading up process of really learning to advocate for my home region, my hometown, and just seeing where the need was.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Hurricane Helene. I have a specific question I want to ask you about that. But tell me a little bit. You've spent now almost 2 decades in communications and community organizers. You talk about Apple Shop, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. What experiences you think helped shape your approach to telling Appalachian stories and telling them with care and also with accuracy?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to media literacy. And I think a lot of times, especially in today's world, it used to be different. When I first started with anything in documentary as a teenager in the early 2000s, and it was really hard to get your hands on a camera. They were expensive. Film was expensive. We were just starting to switch over to digital. And so that was important to be able to get your hands on equipment. But now we carry all of that device essentially in our phones.
Yeah.
And so actually learning how to create media is one thing, but learning media literacy is an entire different part of the work. And so for me, being in Appalachia, it's consuming a lot of media, watching all the films that are made locally, regionally, nationally about the region, and understanding how stories are told and where bias plays in when a piece is made, but also just, thinking through systemically if a piece is actually covering what led up to an issue in a film. Often, especially, we went through the war on poverty in the 60s here, and there's always been this look how awful it is, but never really digging beneath the surface. And what we know is we live here, it doesn't feel awful. We choose to stay here. We love here. We think that there's so much beauty and there's a reason why people are rooted here. So one, how do we show that? But two, when we do see problems in our community, how do we systemically think about what caused them and simultaneously think about how to correct them?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's always been a big part of my journey has always been consuming a lot of media, breaking it down with other media makers, really talking it through. I love to get to sit down with other filmmakers and really just dive into what did we just watch and how did it make us feel and why did it make us feel that way? But also, I think for me, a critical part of that too is that I would go into communities that I didn't feel rooted in and think about how I would capture that community and really question, was I capturing it on a surface level or was I capturing it on a deeper level the way I want my community represented? Yeah. And so I think about that often. I don't often make pieces about anywhere other than Appalachia, but when I travel, I'm always sort of thinking what is the deeper story here so that I'm sort of seeing the community for what it really is.
Yeah. So I know that you have this recent project that you've been working on called Worthy Ground. And so before we get into the specifics of that, let's step back and talk about the organization that you work for now, which is Invest Appalachia. So can you tell me a little bit about what Invest Appalachia is, a little bit of the history of how it came to be, and why it's important for this organization and the work that you all do?
Yeah, Invest Appalachia, we're a regional social impact investment fund, which is a mouthful, but we serve all of Central Appalachia. So that's Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Ohio. And it's really purpose-built for this region, and it's to move patient and risk-tolerant capital that's flexible for community-led projects. And so, how do we put trust in the community that they know where the resources need to go and how do we make those resources happen? So, we cover everything from downtowns to rural hospitals to clean energy, food systems, and climate resilience. And it's really to help communities that don't often have access to capital have it in a way that feels attainable and less scary, and also not as risky to navigate.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Your generosity has a direct and positive impact in the lives of people in need in Appalachia every day. It is the unwavering support of faithful friends like you that make this work possible. Many of our supporters are beginning to plan and envision what kind of legacy they want to leave to support the causes that are near and dear to their hearts. CAP is happy to provide a safe and easy experience for people to create a will and support CAP through non-cash gifts. Through our partnership with Free Will, CAP offers our donors the ability to create a will online and alter it at no charge. Our partnership with Free Will also includes their Smart Giving Suite, which allows donors to give through their IRA, donor advised funds, and stock online, in addition to creating a will for free. In recent years, Appalachia has faced unrelenting challenges, including the pandemic, inflation, and back-to-back natural disasters. You can make a life-changing impact and leave a legacy of hope in Appalachia. To learn more about non-cash giving opportunities, please visit christianapp.org/more ways to give.
So one project that Invest Appalachia has been working on is called Worthy Ground. So can you give us a general sense of that project and how it came about and what is your role in it?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to have an opportunity to bring the project to Invest Appalachia, to say I had potential for funding, and to come to Invest Appalachia and say, I really think there's an opportunity here to connect. In a lot of disaster recovery work that I was doing, we're talking about data, we're talking about research, we're talking about recovery, but we're fading from the national headlines. 2022 faded quickly. The Gatlinburg fires faded quickly. Helene faded quickly because the LA fires happened. So how do we keep the human stories alive of recovery in Central Appalachia in a way that honors the community and doesn't extract from them, but also connects why data research matters, but also people are recovering and the work is happening. And so the investment is critical in order for that to happen. And there's opportunity for local input to really shape what recovery looks like in a way that fits the region specifically, because disaster recovery is not a one size fits all for America. And Central Appalachia has its own culture, its own values, its own uniqueness, its own landscape. And the investment needs to match that. So a lot of my work is telling the stories about recovery, kind of keeping that fire lit in a way, that candle lit, that people are here and doing the work and are really still processing what they're going through and need to be heard along the way. And also along with that is not only do they need to be heard, but we need to record the lessons we've learned, so that we can prepare for the next event, or that other rural communities across America can say, this region practiced this and this was helpful for them, and now we're in the same issue. Let's learn from what they've already collected. We don't always, and I know it's cliche to say we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we don't. But the problem with natural disasters is that you are functioning in adrenaline, and you don't always record how you recovered. And so a big goal of this is to record that recovery and capture that so that we are not constantly having to be like, wait, what did we do that time? We know.
Yeah. And tell me, what is your role in collecting those stories or selecting those stories or doing interviewing people in terms of bringing this project to where it is now?
Yeah, so I'm the main storyteller, media maker on the project. Right now, I do all the filming and editing. As we think about Worthy Ground, I really want to use it as a platform to lift up the work of multiple communities, organizations, places, to really utilize that space to be a cohesive collection of the stories of recovery. So right now, it's a lot of my material, but I'm always looking to promote other folks' material, stories, because I think it's useful for us to have a collected location, website, resource that when we're talking about recovery, we can say, go here and you'll find this story from this organization, this story from this state. So I do a lot of the hands-on editing right now. When it comes to selecting, unfortunately, the pool is large, right? We've all experienced natural disaster over the past 10 years, really, in a way that we hadn't before. And so a lot of it comes down to how I think about a story when I go into a community. So the first full piece I've done since starting, and I just started in July, so we're very much in our infancy at the moment, was I had to start with my story because I kind of had to tell how I got here. But when I thought about covering my community, I thought about the different sectors that disaster impacts. And so I wanted to cover someone who ran a business. I wanted to talk to someone who was a local leader who had to adapt to, small town mayors are not coming into this thinking they're going to lead a national emergency. Right. Talking to those folks, talking to people who do mutual aid, speaking to people who run nonprofits. So just thinking like, what are the components that make up a holistic community, and trying to find someone to represent each one of those hubs when I go out and interview. And so now I'm starting to work on Helene stories. And so it's been folks who work with long-term recovery groups, people who are working on grant writing, people who are working in philanthropy. And as I move forward, thinking more about community storytelling, asking community members in different areas to collect their stories and submit, and then I can edit and turn in, because we want to cover and tell the story as holistically of Central Appalachia as we can.
Yeah. So you mentioned your own experience here with the floods of 2022, where you lost your own home and all of your belongings. Can you tell me how that lived experience maybe impacted, you've kind of touched on it a little bit already, how it impacted you professionally and also personally when you talk about recovery? And also you have a young son who experienced that with you. So can you share a little bit about what that was like for you going through that, and then how you've been able to use that in your work?
I think unfortunately, it gives me a level of empathy when I go out and ask for people to essentially cut open old wounds or healing wounds and to talk about it. And I know it can be really hard. I've given a lot of interviews about the 2022 floods because of my work. And sometimes it can hit you harder to talk about a trauma you've been through. And so I always think about that when I go in and sit down in an interview, and think about how to make someone feel comfortable and make someone feel like I'm not there just for their tears. Because I think it's a full story. And I think because I have that lived experience, my approach makes people feel really comfortable. And one of the very first interviews I did with Worthy Ground specifically, I had made content before coming and creating Worthy Ground and coming to Invest Appalachia. But one of the first interviews I had with Worthy Ground was with a business owner. And she said, people keep coming and asking me to share my story, but then no one leaves providing any solutions.
Oh, wow.
Or help.
Wow.
And that really hit me hard and has given me the gift of thinking about that every time I go into an interview. And so I may not always have the resources to help you, but what I can do is lift your story up and think about who I'm lifting your story up to. Like, how am I connecting your story to someone who may be able to provide help? And that doesn't always just mean capital. Like, some of it is trying to understand policy around disaster recovery, trying to understand, just the emotional recovery side of it. Like, as a mother, my son went through a lot of trauma after the flood and still does. And so I'm always talking about, like, here are the things I learned I did. If you have family members, think about this. Like, thinking about things like disaster distraction boxes for kids, so that in the next storm, they have something to fidget and like keep their minds distracted. But also, when I went to Helene, I wasn't yet working with Worthy Ground. But when I went into Helene, I'd already went through the flood myself, and I went in just days after to deliver supplies, and was like talking to people and getting their stories. And people were like, "Oh, I don't need help. Just this part of my house got damaged. They got it much worse." And like being able to say from experience to someone, like, this is a long journey. And like, yes, you may not have gotten it as bad, but there's resources for you, and you should access those, because in 6 months, you're still going to feel this, and like access every resource available. And so the long-winded answer is, I think about that now when I create content. So we had the winter ice storm last week, right? And I put out a call like on Worthy Ground social media, and then to colleagues and then to other disaster organizers and was like, what are the things you've learned through power outages that you would recommend as we prep for the storm? And so we made content that was like a winter preparedness video. And it was really holistic of like, don't put space heaters near curtains, have backup heat if you can. But then there was like really useful everyday tips like, putting the quarter on top of your ice in the freezer, creating distraction boxes for kids. So it's recording what we've went through to help us guide through the next disaster.
Yeah. And so you talked a little bit about that sort of it's long term. It's not our disaster relief director always says that recovery is a marathon, not a sprint. And so we always think of that as a long-term thing. So I wonder when you think about Worthy Ground, it centers the idea that disaster recovery, it doesn't end when the crisis headlines stop. So how does this project reframe recovery from short-term response to long-term community-led rebuilding? And why is storytelling such a critical part of that shift?
It feels weird when I say this, and I never say it in a lighthearted way, but there is opportunity after disaster, especially for a region like Appalachia that, really has struggled with infrastructure and struggled with mono economies. There's opportunity in disaster where you get to say, okay, we can rebuild this, but we can rebuild this better.
Yeah.
And there's opportunity sort of to just, and as someone who went through disasters, sometimes I say it ripped an emotional Band-Aid off. Like I had to mourn something quickly. And I think Appalachia is in that place as well. Like we kind of had to mourn what we lost.
Yeah.
We definitely had to mourn what we lost, but also like there's so much hope and potential in recovery of like, how do we make it better?
Yeah.
And so I think like that's where the long-term work and the investment really matters. And I think that's where I really want to focus on the storytelling part of it is because I'll give you an example. The same business owner who I went in and interviewed and said, people keep coming and no one's leaving anything. I went in and talked to her about opportunities and like what Invest Appalachia was. And like, it's not always the right fit for everyone, but it could be a fit for her. And so the reason why I was interested in her model is she is running one of the only remaining businesses in downtown Neon, Kentucky. She has been flooded twice since 2022, the last 4 years. She lost everything once and had partial flooding the second time. She's recovered both times. Her and her husband are in their 70s. They run the front part of their business as a flower shop. But what it really funds is a youth program in the back where they have kitchens and they have dance and like gymnastic materials. Mm-hmm. And they run, she's taught baton for like nearly 50 years. And they do it for free in a town that has no childcare. They do it for free. They feed kids for free. Kids are able to get off the bus after school and go there. But because of the flooding, they had severe roof damage and the roof was collapsing. And so we were able to say like, come to us, let's see if there's something we can do. And now she has funding that is able to help them replace their roof and reopen their childcare center and their business in a town that is working so hard and has so much heart to recover, but is easy to not see on the broader scale. Yeah. And so that is the creativity and like the rootedness that I think we need to be looking at in recovery. And that I'm really proud of Invest Appalachia for doing, because we go into communities, we hear from people from all over, and we see what is it that they're bringing to their town that really is lifting up the community and not just being another cookie cutter business.
Yeah. And it sounds like you all really do listen to what's happening there on the ground and what local folks are saying. I know you all have a partnership with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy that emphasizes decisions that are shaped by the people in the area. So what does it look like in practice to put community voices in the driver's seat. When you're making decisions about the investment in disaster recovery, and how do those stories influence where you ultimately put resources, like in this business that is helping families by providing this care for their children?
Yeah, I think it comes down to how we select the projects we fund. And that's because we have an extensive governance of how we fund. And it is made up from local leaders and community members from all across the region, and not, it's people who are rooted in the work, who are rooted in the place, who are thinking about it. They're not all coming from a financial background. They're coming from different aspects. So we have folks who are on our board or on our catalytic capital committee, who are all overseeing the different ways we are funding, or like the different things that are being brought to us, and thinking like, does this fit in our core values? Does this fit in our buckets that we've committed to really bringing throughout the region? The buckets of work we want to commit to. And so utilizing voices from around the region to be part of the selection is really what it comes down to, versus going into a bank and saying, here's my credit history,
right,
and you don't understand my community.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what really makes us unique and valuable, is that we have a connection and commitment and understanding of the community we're in.
You can make this summer into a season of service and have a lifetime of impact on youth in Appalachia. Join us in the great outdoors by becoming a camp counselor at one of our 2 beautiful camps in Eastern Kentucky. Room and board, stipend, travel reimbursement, and educational award are available. Apply today at christianapp.org/volunteer. That is christianapp.org/volunteer.
You've mentioned now Helene a couple of times, and you recently served as the Appalachian Helene Response Fund Manager. What did you learn about coordinating support across the region, and what did you find worked especially well?
Yeah, so I worked with Appalachia Funders Network in the first few months after Helene. I came on, and what I learned is that even regionally, natural disasters impact everyone so differently. So the need from North Carolina to Tennessee to Southwest Virginia, in a lot of ways had similarities, and in a lot of ways had differences.
Yeah.
And so that is hard to navigate, but people crave space to bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah.
People are craving space to, especially in those initial days, grieve with each other, but also bounce ideas off each other. And so really, we can't work within state lines. We can't work within silos. And Helene really was an eye-opening experience of like what it means to do regional organizing in a way that the resources might be coming in more to North Carolina, but they're desperately needed in Southwest Virginia.
Yeah.
Or Southwest Virginia has learned something about policy that they didn't realize through FEMA that someone in North Carolina hasn't heard yet. And really having that collective space for folks to really hear and learn together. I would say the challenges to it, though, mostly it's the networking that I think is the most valuable and important part in those initial days. And this is what I still tell everyone in recovery, even on an organizational level. Those first few months, you're running off adrenaline.
Yeah.
You won't grieve until that adrenaline wears off. You might cry, but you're not going to grieve until that adrenaline wears off. And so creating a system, an ecosystem where people can go through that together is crucial, and gives people space to travel that journey together. Yeah. And then I feel like after the grieving, then you're digging into the long-term recovery, but you're exhausted too.
Yeah.
And so having other people who can lift you up and work with you is big. And then I would say the biggest challenge is just that when natural disaster hits, it doesn't just hit where you work.
Right.
It hits you personally. And so it can be really challenging to think about how to keep good work going, to keep not only businesses funded, but hospitals moving, food access happening, connectivity, infrastructure, to keep all those things moving when people are also living in the region and personally dealing with the loss. And so I think the hard part is just, when the infrastructure goes down in one of these storms, like in 2022 or Helene, and you lose access to water and electricity and phone service and internet for days, weeks at a time, that can make it really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the work we do now, is because we're thinking about those resiliency hubs. We learned from this experience. Mm-hmm. So how do we make those resiliency hubs throughout the region help us think about just those touch point everyday needs that we have should things go down again, so that there's just a little bit of weight taken off people's shoulders and they have the ability to breathe a little easier so they can work.
Willa, this has been an amazing conversation. I've learned so much about Invest Appalachia and look forward to being able to listen to some of the stories in Worthy Ground. And we hope our listeners will go and check out some of those stories too. And so when we wrap up our episode, we always end with CAP's mission statement. And so the mission statement of Christian Appalachian Project is building hope, transforming lives, sharing Christ's love through service in Appalachia. So when you think of those four words, hope, transformation, service, and love, which one do you think embodies the Appalachian spirit the most?
For me, I think it's service. I think we have always looked after each other. And, I hear people say we're tired of being resilient, and we are. You shouldn't have to be resilient all the time. But we have always, because of that, looked after our neighbors, loved our neighbors, and tried to protect our neighbors. And I think there's just a real heart for making sure that the community around you feels safe and secure. And I know it doesn't always seem that way, but in my heart, that's what really has shaped me as a person, is seeing my Appalachian community show up and serve in multiple ways.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing with us about the work you all do. And it's just been great seeing the insights of someone that's on the ground and working with communities and uplifting like that community-led response and community-led perspective on recovery. So, Willa, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great talking with you.
Our guest today was Willa Johnson, Disaster Recovery Communications Coordinator at Invest Appalachia. Thanks for listening. You can catch new episodes of our show every Tuesday and invite your friends to listen to. You can follow the work of Christian Appalachian Project on all social media channels and find the show at christianapp.org/podcast or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you like the show, you know the drill. Click on that follow button and leave a review so that it will help other people find the show as well. Until next time, this is the Mountain Spirit. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep lifting up Appalachian voices.